May 4, 1945. A staff officer walks into Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force in Reims, France. His face is pale. His hands are trembling. He is carrying a field report that will nearly destroy the alliance that won World War II. General Dwight D. Eisenhower is sitting at his desk reviewing German surrender protocols. The war in Europe has days left. Maybe hours. The Third Reich is collapsing from every direction. Soviet forces are pushing from the east. American and British forces are closing from the west. Germany is finished. Eisenhower thinks the nightmare is almost over. He is wrong. His Chief of Staff, General Walter Bedell Smith, takes the field report. He reads it. His expression changes completely. Sir Smith says quietly, "We have a situation with Third Army." Eisenhower looks up. What kind of situation? Patton is in Linz. Eisenhower blinks. Linz? That is in Austria. That is 80 miles past his authorized stop line. That is deep inside the Soviet occupation zone. That is territory that Stalin expects to control. Smith nods. 80 miles past his stop line, sir. And the Soviets are 30 miles east. The room goes completely silent. Here is what you need to understand. In February 1945, 3 months earlier, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met at Yalta in the Soviet Union. They divided post-war Europe like a birthday cake. Germany would be split into 4 occupation zones. Austria would be split similarly. The Enns River in Austria was the agreed boundary. Everything west of the Enns would be American and British. Everything east of the Enns would be Soviet. This was not a suggestion. This was a signed agreement between world leaders. This was international law. This was the foundation of the post-war order. And George S. Patton had just driven his entire Third Army straight through it. When did he cross the Enns? Eisenhower asks. May 2nd, sir. 0400 hours. No authorization requested. Eisenhower stares at the map on his wall. His finger traces the line from the Enns River to Linz. 80 miles through mountainous terrain. Third Army was not supposed to move at all. They were holding at the Enns per explicit orders from Schaeff, orders that came directly from the Yalta agreements. That is impossible, Eisenhower says. We have explicit agreements with the Soviets about stop lines. Smith pulls out another document. Field Report 33782. Third Army elements secured Linz at 0600 hours, May 4th. Bridges intact. 11th Armored Division establishing defensive positions east of the city. Eisenhower does the math. 80 miles in 2 days. That is not a reconnaissance patrol. That is not a tactical adjustment. That is a full army advance into territory the Soviets are expecting to occupy. The Soviets are expecting to occupy that sector, Eisenhower says slowly. That was settled in February at Yalta. Yes, sir. And according to intelligence, the Red Army's 6th Guards Tank Army is 20 miles from Linz. Eisenhower closes his eyes. American forces and Soviet forces are about to meet in Linz, Austria. Nobody coordinated this. Nobody authorized this. Patton just decided to take the city. Get him on the phone, Eisenhower says. Now. They try for 4 hours. 4 hours of radio calls. 4 hours of field telephone relays. 4 hours of messages passed through Third Army headquarters. Patton is at a forward command post. They are having difficulty establishing contact. Difficulty. That is what they call it when a 4-star general decides not to answer his phone. Finally, at 1400 hours, Eisenhower gets through. Patton is at his forward command post in Linz itself. He is standing in the city he seized without orders. George Eisenhower says, and his voice is cold enough to freeze the telephone line, "What the hell are you doing in Linz? You were ordered to hold at the Enns River." There is a pause. Then Patton's voice comes through crackling, but unmistakable. Ike. The bridges were intact. The Germans were retreating east. Someone had to secure the area. The Soviets were supposed to secure that area. We have signed agreements. Stalin is already sending messages through Marshall about American units in the Soviet occupation zone. Well, Ike, Patton says, and there is that familiar tone in his voice. Unapologetic, defiant. I figured possession is 9/10 of the law. We are here. We took it without firing a shot. The local population is actually relieved to see us instead of the Red Army. Eisenhower rubs his forehead. This is not about tactics, George. This is diplomacy. We are trying to build a post-war alliance with the Soviets. You have just driven a tank column straight through that alliance. With respect, sir, if we are building an alliance, we should negotiate from a position of strength. Right now, we are in Linz. They are not. That is strength. George. Eisenhower's voice drops to something dangerous. I need you to understand something. President Roosevelt is dead 3 weeks. Truman is trying to establish credibility. The entire post-war order is being negotiated right now, and you have just made my job as Supreme Commander infinitely harder. I need you to hold your current position and prepare to withdraw if ordered. Silence on the line. Then Patton speaks again. Withdraw. His voice is sharp now. Ike. These are American positions now. My men took this ground. They bled to get here. Your men were not authorized to be there in the first place. Another long silence. Eisenhower can hear voices in the background. Officers talking. Radio chatter. The sounds of an army that has just conquered a city it was forbidden to touch. Understood, Sir Patton finally says. Third Army will hold current positions. George. I am serious about this. Do not. The line clicks. Patton has hung up. Eisenhower slowly puts down the receiver. He looks at Bedell Smith standing in the doorway. How did it go, sir? He hung up on me. Eisenhower sits back in his chair. He is the Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe. He answers to Washington, to London, and indirectly to Moscow through the combined chiefs. And one of his army commanders just seized a city in the Soviet occupation zone without orders, then hung up the telephone when ordered to prepare for withdrawal. Get me a direct line to General Marshall in Washington, Eisenhower says. And find out everything you can about Soviet positions in that sector. If their forward elements run into Patton's armor, this could get very bad very fast. Here is what makes this situation terrifying. The Red Army's 6th Guards Tank Army has 80,000 soldiers. Patton has 23,000 in the Linz sector. The Soviets have fought their way from Stalingrad to Vienna. They have lost 27 million people in this war. They are not going to back down because George Patton decided to redraw the map of Europe. The next morning, May 5th, the situation escalates. Soviet Marshal Fyodor Tolbukhin sends an urgent communication to SHAEF headquarters. Red Army units approaching Linz from Czechoslovakia have encountered American armored forces. Tolbukhin demands immediate clarification of American positions and intentions. The message is polite, diplomatic, but the undertone is clear. What are American forces doing in Soviet territory? Eisenhower drafts a careful response. He explains that Third Army pursued retreating German forces across the Enns River and secured Linz to prevent chaos during the final collapse of German resistance. He assures Tolbukhin that American forces will coordinate with Soviet command regarding final occupation zone boundaries. He does not mention that Patton never requested authorization for the advance. He does not mention that Patton is now fortifying positions around Linz. He definitely does not mention that Patton has no intention of withdrawing. That afternoon, the situation gets worse. General George C. Marshall cables from Washington. President Truman is receiving formal protests from Soviet Ambassador Andrei Gromyko. Stalin himself has sent a message to Truman questioning American adherence to the Yalta agreements. Truman has been president for 3 weeks. This is his first major test in Allied coordination. Roosevelt negotiated Yalta. Roosevelt built the alliance. And now Stalin is asking if the United States keeps its agreements. Marshall's cable is direct. Resolve the Linz situation immediately. The president cannot afford a public confrontation with the Soviets days before Germany's surrender. Eisenhower reads the cable twice. Then he calls his staff together. What is Patton's current status? Sir, Third Army has elements of the 11th Armored Division in and around Linz. They have also moved the 65th Infantry Division forward. Estimates put American strength in the Linz sector at approximately 23,000 troops, and the Soviets. The Red Army's 6th Guards Tank Army is 18 miles east of Linz. Marshal Konev is moving elements of the 4th Ukrainian Front south. We estimate 80,000 Soviet troops within 24 hours of Linz, sir. Eisenhower stares at the map. 23,000 Americans. 80,000 Soviets. In peacetime Austria. With no clear orders about who withdraws. What is Patton doing? The intelligence officer hesitates. Sir, according to reports from Third Army headquarters, General Patton has ordered defensive fortifications constructed around key positions in Linz. He has also moved additional units to secure roads leading to Salzburg. Defensive fortifications, Eisenhower repeats. Yes, sir. He is digging in. It appears so, sir. Eisenhower turns to Bedell Smith. Get me Churchill's staff. I need to know what London's position is on this, and find out if Truman has responded to Stalin yet. That same evening, May 6th, Patton makes his next move, and this one brings Stalin himself into direct confrontation with American forces. Austrian officials from the city administration visit Patton's headquarters in Linz. They are asking for American civil affairs support. Schools need to reopen. Infrastructure needs repair. The local population needs food distribution organized. They are not asking the Soviets. They are asking the Americans, and Patton says yes. By midday, Third Army has established military government offices in Linz. American civil affairs officers are coordinating with Austrian officials. The population of Linz, 180,000 people, is now under American administration. Eisenhower finds out through an intelligence summary that evening. He established a military government, Eisenhower says to Smith. He is not just occupying Linz, he is administering it. Yes, sir, and there is more. Patton has moved units to secure Mauthausen. Eisenhower looks up. Mauthausen, the concentration camp that Third Army liberated on May 5th, one of the worst camps the Allies have found. Tens of thousands of prisoners. Evidence of mass murder on an industrial scale. Mauthausen is 15 miles east of the Enns. Smith continues. Technically in the Soviet zone per Yalta. Patton has positioned the 11th Armored to maintain control of the camp and surrounding area. If Third Army withdraws, the Soviets take control of Mauthausen. The prisoners. The evidence. Everything. What is the Soviet reaction? Eisenhower asks. Marshal Tolbukin has sent a second communication. Soviet forces are requesting immediate American withdrawal to the Enns River line. They are calling the current situation an illegal occupation of Soviet territory. Illegal occupation. Yes, sir. Any incidents? 2 reports of Soviet reconnaissance patrols encountering American positions. No shots fired, but tensions are high. Both sides are watching each other. Eisenhower stands and walks to the window. Outside, Reims is quiet. The war is almost over. Germany is about to surrender, and his Third Army commander is in a standoff with the Red Army over Austria. Draft a withdrawal order, Eisenhower says. Third Army is to pull back to the Enns River within 48 hours. I will sign it in the morning after I speak to Marshal. And General Patton. Tell him I am flying to Austria. I will deliver the order personally. But what Eisenhower does not know yet is that Patton has already issued orders that will make withdrawal virtually impossible. That same evening, Patton meets with his division commanders at his headquarters in Linz. The 11th Armored Division commander, General Charles Kilburn, is there. So is Major General James Polk of the 65th Infantry Division. Patton spreads a map on the table. Gentlemen, he says, we are staying in Linz. Kilburn glances at Polk. Sir, Schaeff has not authorized. I do not care what Schaeff has or has not authorized. Patton interrupts. We took this ground. We are holding this ground. The Soviets want it. They can ask politely. General Polk says carefully. The Soviets have significant forces moving into the area. If they decide to press the issue, then we will have a problem, Patton says. But that is their problem, not ours. We have the best defensive terrain between here and Berlin. We have the local population on our side. And we have Mauthausen. Those prisoners are not going under Soviet administration, not while I am in command. He looks at both men. His eyes are steady. His voice is certain. Fortify every key position. I want defensive lines established on the roads leading into Linz from the east. Coordinate with civil affairs to integrate the local population. Make this occupation permanent, Sir Polk says. Eisenhower is going to order us to withdraw. Probably. But it takes time to withdraw an army. Logistics, coordination. Could take a week, maybe longer. And a lot can happen in a week. The division commanders exchange glances. They understand. Patton is buying time. For what they are not entirely sure. But they understand. One more thing Patton says. No incidents with Soviet forces. If their patrols approach, be polite. Professional. But do not move. Understand. Yes, sir? After they leave, Patton's intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, approaches. General Koch says quietly, "This is going to create a crisis at the highest levels." "I know," Patton says. "That is the point." Sir Patton looks at the map. At Linz, at the Soviet positions to the east, at the line that marks the Yalta Agreement boundary. "We just spent 4 years defeating Germany," Patton says. "And now we are going to hand half of Europe to the Soviets. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Hungary, all of it. And nobody in Washington or London seems to understand what that means." General Eisenhower understands the political situation. Eisenhower is a politician. He has to be. I do not. My job is to win, and right now winning means holding Linz. They will order you to withdraw. Probably. But until they do, we are here. And maybe, just maybe, someone in Washington will wake up and realize we are giving away everything we fought for. He walks to the window and looks out at Linz. At the Austrian city that is not supposed to be under American control. Get some sleep, Oscar. Tomorrow is going to be interesting. And then the Soviets make a move that changes everything. But that is a story for part 2. Because what happens next will bring Eisenhower himself to Linz. It will force a confrontation between the two most famous American generals of World War II. And it will reveal a truth about the post-war world that official Allied policy refuses to acknowledge. The question is simple. Will Eisenhower order Patton to withdraw? Will Patton obey? And what happens when 23,000 American soldiers face 80,000 Soviet soldiers across a line that nobody agreed to? The answers will shock you. In Part 1, General George S. Patton crossed 80 miles into Soviet territory without authorization, seized the Austrian city of Linz, and hung up the phone on Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower. 23,000 American soldiers now face 80,000 Soviet troops across a line that nobody agreed to draw. But convincing Patton to withdraw is only half of Eisenhower's problem. Here is a statistic that should terrify you. In May 1945, the Soviet Union has 11 million soldiers under arms. The United States has 8 million. Stalin has already absorbed Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and most of Czechoslovakia. He is not asking permission. He is taking. And now Eisenhower must choose between his most brilliant general and the alliance that won World War II. This is where everything gets worse. May 7, 1945. Germany surrenders unconditionally. General Alfred Jodl signs the instrument of surrender at 0241 hours in Reims. Eisenhower witnesses it. So does Marshal Georgy Zhukov for the Soviet Union. The Third Reich is finished. But the celebration lasts exactly 47 minutes. That is how long it takes for the first cable to arrive from Moscow. Stalin is furious. The Soviet leader has sent a formal message to President Truman. It is polite on the surface, diplomatic language, careful phrasing, but the meaning is unmistakable. American forces are illegally occupying Soviet territory. The United States signed the Yalta agreements. The United States is breaking its word. Stalin asks one simple question. Does America keep its promises? President Harry Truman has been in office for 3 weeks. Roosevelt is dead. The war is over. And now the leader of the Soviet Union is publicly questioning whether America can be trusted. General George C. Marshall cables from Washington. His message is direct. Resolve this immediately. The president cannot afford a confrontation with Moscow. Eisenhower reads the cable. He reads it again. Then he calls his staff together. I need options, Eisenhower says. Real options, not political talking points. His intelligence officer steps forward. Sir, we have 3 choices. First order, immediate withdrawal. Third, Army pulls back to the Enns River within 24 hours. We honor Yalta. Stalin is satisfied, but Patton will resist. He may refuse the order entirely, and if he refuses, then we have a court-martial of the most famous American general in Europe. 3 weeks after victory. The press will have a field day. Option 2. Negotiate. Use our current position as leverage. Try to adjust the occupation zone boundaries before withdrawing. How long would that take, unknown, sir? Days, possibly weeks. And the Soviets may not agree to negotiate at all. Option 3. Hold. Reinforce Patton's position. Make it clear we are not withdrawing. Eisenhower stares at the map. Hold. Against 80,000 Soviet troops, with an ally we just spent 4 years fighting beside. That option leads to war, Eisenhower says quietly. Yes, sir, it does. The room is silent. These are the only choices. Withdraw and humiliate Patton, negotiate and risk Soviet rejection. Or hold and start a new war before the old one is officially over. Eisenhower makes his decision. I am flying to Linz. I will speak to Patton directly. Sir Bedell Smith says carefully, if you go to Linz, you are legitimizing his position. You are treating this as a negotiation, not an order. I know, Eisenhower says. That is exactly what I intend to do. But Patton has already made his next move, and this one changes everything. The same morning, May 7th, Patton receives visitors at his headquarters in Linz. Not military officers, not American officials. Austrian civilians. The mayor of Linz arrives with a delegation of city leaders. They are carrying documents, requests, proposals. They want American help rebuilding their city. They want American protection from the Red Army. They want to know if the Americans will stay. Patton looks at these men, Austrian citizens who survived Nazi occupation, who watched the Wehrmacht march through their streets, who saw the concentration camps built in their countryside. Now they are asking Americans to protect them from the Soviets. We will stay, Patton tells them. As long as I am in command, Linz is American. The mayor nearly weeps with relief. General, he says, you do not understand what you are saving us from. The Soviets in Vienna are already arresting people, taking food, taking women. If you leave, the same will happen here. Patton nods. I understand perfectly. That afternoon, Patton signs administrative orders. American civil affairs officers will manage food distribution. American military police will maintain order. American engineers will repair infrastructure. The city of Linz, population 180,000, is now under formal American military government. And then Patton does something even more significant. He orders units to secure Mauthausen concentration camp, 15 miles east of the Enns River, deep in Soviet territory, where tens of thousands of prisoners are still recovering from Nazi atrocities. If we withdraw, Patton tells his staff, those survivors go under Soviet administration. You know what that means. They have already survived one totalitarian regime. I will not hand them to another. His intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, speaks carefully. General Schaeff will never approve this. Schaeff does not need to approve it. We are already here. Sir, the Soviets will see this as a deliberate provocation. Good, Patton says. Maybe someone in Washington will finally understand what we are dealing with. This is the moment when Patton transforms from insubordinate general to Cold War prophet. He is not just holding territory. He is making a statement about the future of Europe, about the nature of Soviet power, about what America should stand for in the post-war world. And Eisenhower is flying directly into this situation. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The war is officially over. Celebrations erupt across America and Britain. Soldiers weep with relief. Civilians dance in the streets. The nightmare of Nazi Germany is finished. But in Austria, American and Soviet forces are watching each other across defensive lines that neither side authorized. Eisenhower's plane lands at a forward airstrip outside Linz at 0900 hours. General Omar Bradley accompanies him. So does Bedell Smith. This is not a social visit. This is an intervention. Patton is waiting on the tarmac. Full uniform. Pearl-handled revolvers on his belt. He salutes as Eisenhower steps off the plane. "Welcome to Linz, sir." Eisenhower returns the salute. His face is stone. "We need to talk, George. Now." They walk to Patton's command tent. Maps cover every surface. Reports are stacked in corners. "This is the nerve center of an unauthorized occupation," George Eisenhower says. "I am ordering you to withdraw to the Enns River. This comes from President Truman himself." Patton's jaw tightens, but his voice remains controlled. "Ike, we both know what happens if we pull out. The Soviets move in. The same Austrians who greeted us as liberators get Soviet occupation. The survivors at Mauthausen get Soviet administrators. Is that what we won this war for? We won this war as allies, George. That includes the Soviets." Patton steps closer. His voice drops. "We won this war. And now we are handing half of Europe to Stalin on a silver platter. You have read the intelligence reports. You know what he is doing in Poland, in Romania. You want to give him Austria too? We just ended one war. You want to start another. I want to win the peace, not just the war." Silence fills the tent. Bradley watches both men. Smith stands by the entrance. This is the confrontation that will determine the shape of post-war Europe. Eisenhower walks to the map. He stares at it for a long moment. At Linz. At the Enns River. At the line that marks the agreed boundary between American and Soviet zones. Then he speaks quietly. "You are right." Patton looks at him. "Stalin is taking everything we let him take." Eisenhower continues. "The Austrian people would rather have us than the Red Army. And strategically, Linz matters. You are right about all of it. So we stay," Patton says. "No." Eisenhower turns to face him. "We withdraw to the Enns in 1 week. And during that week, we negotiate with the Soviets for a different occupation line." "Negotiate," Patton says. "With what leverage?" "With the leverage that we are currently occupying Linz." "That is your leverage, George. You created it. Now I am going to use it." Patton is silent for a long moment. Then he speaks again. 1 week, 1 week. I will delay the withdrawal order. That gives our diplomats time to negotiate with Moscow. If we can adjust the occupation line, we adjust it. If we cannot, we withdraw. But we do it on our terms, not Stalin's. And if the Soviets refuse to negotiate, then we withdraw, Eisenhower says. Because the alternative is an armed confrontation with the Red Army in peacetime Austria, and that George is not an option. Patton walks to the map. He stares at it. At the city, he seized without orders. At the ground, his army holds. Ike Patton says slowly, "I hope someone in Washington understands that we are on the eve of giving away the fruits of our victory to a potentially more dangerous enemy than the one we just defeated." The words hang in the air. Eisenhower does not respond immediately. He looks at Patton, at the general who just articulated the Cold War in May 1945, before anyone in Washington was ready to hear it. "I understand, George," Eisenhower says quietly. "I understand exactly what you are saying." "Do you?" "Yes. And so does Churchill. And so does half the intelligence community. But understanding is not the same as acting. We have agreements. We have alliances. We have a president who needs to build credibility with Stalin to manage the peace. And we have you in Linz without authorization creating an international incident. I created an opportunity. You created a crisis." Eisenhower counters. "But you also gave us leverage. So I am using it." 1 week. Withdrawal to the Enns on May 15th. That is final. Patton salutes. Understood, sir? Eisenhower returns the salute. Then he does something unexpected. He extends his hand. Patton takes it. You were right about the Soviets, George Eisenhower says. Just so you know. You were right. They shake hands. Then Eisenhower turns and walks out of the tent. The next 6 days are the most intense diplomatic negotiations of 1945. American representatives meet with Soviet counterparts. They discuss occupation zone boundaries. They discuss administrative arrangements. They discuss the future of Austria. And they use Patton's position as leverage. Here is what the Soviets want: full control of everything east of the Enns River. That includes Linz. That includes Mauthausen. That includes 180,000 Austrian civilians who have already welcomed American forces. Here is what America offers. We will withdraw from Linz. But we want guarantees about civilian treatment. We want international access to Mauthausen. We want modified boundaries that protect key populations. The negotiations are brutal. The Soviets do not want to compromise. They have the Yalta agreements. They have international law on their side. They have 80,000 troops ready to move into Linz the moment Americans leave. But they also have a problem. American forces are already there, dug in, fortified, not shooting, but not leaving either. And every day they stay, the Austrian population becomes more attached to American administration. On May 12th, the Soviets make a counteroffer. They will accept modified boundaries for Upper Austria. Mauthausen will remain under international supervision during the transition period. Certain civilian protections will be guaranteed. It is not everything Patton wanted, but it is more than Yalta promised. Eisenhower accepts. May 15, 1945. Third Army begins withdrawal from Linz, but not to the original Enns River line. To a modified boundary negotiated over 6 days of intense diplomacy. Mauthausen remains under international supervision. Parts of Upper Austria receive extended American administration during the transition. Patton watches his army pull back. He stands on a hill overlooking Linz, the city he seized without orders, the city he held against Stalin's fury, the city he is now surrendering. Oscar Patton says to his intelligence officer, "We did the right thing. Did we win?" "Sir." Patton is quiet for a long moment. "We bought time. We forced them to negotiate. We protected those people at Mauthausen for a few more weeks. But win?" He shakes his head. "This is not about winning anymore. This is about how much we lose." Koch does not respond. There is nothing to say. The Soviet 6th Guards Tank Army enters Linz on May 16th. 80,000 troops. Tanks. Artillery. The same force that fought from Stalingrad to Vienna. They occupy the city that Patton held for 11 days. But something has changed. The precedent is set. American forces can push back. American diplomats can negotiate. The Yalta agreements are not sacred scripture. They can be modified, adjusted, challenged. This is the lesson that will shape the next 45 years. Here are the statistics. Patton's unauthorized advance covered 80 miles in 48 hours. American forces held Linz for 11 days. Soviet forces that would have occupied the city without opposition numbered 80,000. Casualties from the confrontation, 0. But the deeper impact cannot be measured in numbers. Patton saw the Soviet threat when official Allied policy was still cooperation. He acted on that vision when no one else would. And Eisenhower, bound by political realities, still found a way to use that action. 2 years later, the Truman Doctrine would formalize American policy of Soviet containment. The Marshall Plan would rebuild Western Europe as a buffer. NATO would create a military alliance to counter the Red Army. Everything Patton warned about in May 1945 became official American policy by 1947. But here is what nobody expected. Stalin did not forget Linz. He did not forget Patton. He did not forget that one American general defied agreements, seized territory, and forced the Soviet Union to negotiate. Soviet intelligence begins tracking Patton's movements, his communications, his meetings, his plans. Because Patton is not finished. He is already talking about the next phase. about pushing the Soviets back further, about liberating Poland, about finishing the job while American forces are still mobilized. And Stalin is listening. In Part 3, we will see what happens when Patton's vision collides with political reality. We will learn about the secret communications between Moscow and Washington. We will discover why Patton was transferred from Third Army, and we will uncover the truth about the car accident that killed him in December 1945, 7 months after Linz George S. Patton would be dead. Coincidence, or something else entirely? The answers will disturb you. In Part 1, General George S. Patton crossed 80 miles into Soviet territory and seized Linz without authorization. In Part 2, Eisenhower flew to Austria, confronted Patton directly, and negotiated a compromise that bought 6 days of diplomatic leverage. American forces withdrew on May 15th to modified boundaries. But when news of the Linz confrontation reached Moscow, Stalin did not forget. Soviet intelligence began tracking Patton's movements, his communications, his plans for pushing the Red Army back further. Here is a statistic that changes everything. Between May and December 1945, Soviet intelligence intercepted 147 communications mentioning Patton's name. 23 of those communications discussed his proposals for military action against the Soviet Union. Stalin read every single one. And now, this was no longer about Austria. This was about eliminating the one American general who understood the Soviet threat. The game had changed completely. May 1945. Moscow, the Kremlin. Lavrenti Beria, head of Soviet intelligence, presents his daily briefing to Stalin. The reports from Austria dominate the discussion. The American General Patton seized Linz without orders from his own command. Beria explains, he held the city for 11 days against our forces. He established military government over Austrian civilians. He secured Mauthausen concentration camp to prevent our administration. Stalin listens without expression. His pipe smoke curls toward the ceiling. And now Stalin asks. Now he is talking about more, Beria says. Our sources in American military headquarters report that Patton is advocating for offensive operations against Soviet forces. He wants to push us out of Czechoslovakia, out of Poland. He speaks openly about war with the Soviet Union. Stalin sets down his pipe. Does the American government support this position? Eisenhower ordered him to withdraw. Truman wants cooperation with us. But Patton is popular, dangerous. He has influence beyond his rank. Stalin nods slowly. He understands popular generals. He has eliminated several of his own. Watch him, Stalin says. Everything he does, everyone he meets, every word he speaks. I want to know. Beria nods. It will be done. This is the moment when George S. Patton becomes a target. Not of German forces, not of Japanese forces, but of Soviet intelligence, the most thorough, ruthless surveillance apparatus in the world. And Patton has no idea. June 1945. Patton is transferred from 3rd Army to 15th Army. On paper, this is a promotion. 15th Army is responsible for compiling the official history of the war in Europe. Important work, prestigious assignment. But Patton understands immediately. This is exile. They are taking away his combat command. They are removing him from operational authority. They are silencing him. He writes in his diary on June 7th, I have been relieved of 3rd Army. The war I predicted is coming, and they have taken away my ability to fight it. We will regret this decision. History will judge us harshly. But Patton does not go quietly. He continues speaking, to journalists, to fellow officers, to anyone who will listen. He warns about Soviet expansion, about the Iron Curtain descending across Europe, about the need for American strength. Every word is intercepted by Soviet intelligence. July 1945. Patton gives an interview to American reporters. He compares the Soviet Union to Nazi Germany. He suggests that American forces should have continued east after defeating Hitler. He calls the post-war settlement a betrayal of everything American soldiers fought for. The interview creates a firestorm. Washington is furious. Truman is trying to maintain cooperation with Stalin. The United Nations is being established. The post-war order depends on American-Soviet partnership. And Patton is calling the Soviets the new Nazis. General Marshall cables Eisenhower. Control your general. This cannot continue. Eisenhower summons Patton to headquarters. It is their last face-to-face meeting. George Eisenhower says, "You have to stop." Stop what? Telling the truth. Stop making policy statements. Stop talking to the press. Stop undermining the president. Patton stands rigid. Ike, in 2 years, everything I have said will be obvious to everyone. The Soviets are not our allies. They are our enemies. We are handing them half of Europe because nobody in Washington has the courage to see what is right in front of them. That may be true, Eisenhower says carefully, but it is not your decision to make. You are a general, not a politician, not a diplomat. Your job is to follow orders. My job is to win, Patton says. That has always been my job. The war is over, George. No, Patton says, it is not. It is just beginning. And when history writes the story of this moment, people will ask why we gave away everything we fought for. And the answer will be, because generals like me were silenced, while the Soviets took everything they wanted. Eisenhower does not respond. There is nothing to say. Both men know Patton is probably right. But being right and being able to act are different things. Patton leaves. He will never see Eisenhower in person again. August 1945. Soviet intelligence increases surveillance on Patton. They track his meetings with German officials in Bavaria. They monitor his statements about using former Wehrmacht officers against the Soviet Union. They document his growing frustration with American policy. Beria reports to Stalin. Patton is becoming more vocal. He is meeting with German generals. He is discussing plans for reorganizing German military units. Stalin considers this information. Patton with German forces under his command. Patton advocating for war. Patton refusing to be silenced. The American government cannot control him. Stalin asks. They are trying, Beria says. But he is popular. A hero. They cannot simply remove him without consequences. Stalin nods. Then we must be patient. September 1945. Patton makes his fatal mistake. In a press conference, he compares Nazi Party membership to American political party membership. He suggests that most Nazis were simply ordinary Germans who joined for career advancement. He argues against aggressive denazification policies. The backlash is immediate and devastating. Jewish organizations protest. American newspapers condemn him. Politicians demand action. Patton has compared Nazis to Republicans and Democrats. Eisenhower has no choice. On October 2, 1945, Patton is relieved of command of 15th Army. He is reassigned to a meaningless administrative position. His military career is effectively over. Patton writes in his diary, "I have been destroyed not by the Germans, but by my own people. I told the truth and they punished me for it. This is how empires fall. Not from external enemies, but from internal weakness." October 1945. Bad Nauheim, Germany. Patton lives in a requisitioned villa. He has no real duties, no real authority. He spends his days writing his memoirs, riding horses, hunting, waiting. He tells his aide, Major General Hobart Gay, "They think they have silenced me. They are wrong. My book will tell the truth about the Soviets, about Yalta, about everything Washington got wrong. History will vindicate me. But Soviet intelligence is still watching. They know about the memoir. They know Patton intends to publish his unfiltered views on Soviet expansion, American weakness, and the mistakes of the post-war settlement." Beria reports to Stalin in November. Patton is writing. He will publish his account of the war. He will describe his views on the Soviet Union. He will influence American public opinion. Stalin considers this a book by the most famous American general. A book warning about Soviet intentions. A book that could turn American opinion against cooperation with Moscow. When will it be published? Stalin asks. Unknown. Perhaps next year. Perhaps sooner. Stalin is silent for a long moment. Then he speaks. Ensure it is not published. Beria nods. He understands. December 8, 1945. Near Mannheim, Germany. Patton is traveling in a 1938 Cadillac staff car. His Chief of Staff, Major General Hobart Gay, sits beside him. They are heading to a pheasant hunting trip. The road is clear. The weather is cold but dry. Traffic is light, nothing unusual. At approximately 11:45 hours, a U.S. Army truck turned suddenly in front of Patton's car. The driver, Technical Sergeant Robert L. Thompson, later claims he was trying to turn into a depot entrance. He did not see the Cadillac approaching. The collision is not severe. The Cadillac is traveling at approximately 30 miles per hour. The truck is moving slowly. Both vehicles are damaged but not destroyed. Gay is uninjured. The driver, Private First Class Horace Woodring, is uninjured. The only serious casualty is Patton himself. The impact throws Patton forward. His head strikes the partition between front and rear seats. He suffers a severe spinal cord injury. Cervical vertebrae fractured. Paralysis from the neck down. He is taken to a military hospital in Heidelberg. The doctors assess his injuries. The prognosis is grim. Even if he survives, he will never walk again, never ride a horse again, never command troops again. Patton knows. He tells his wife Beatrice, who flies from America to be with him. This is a hell of a way to die. For 12 days, Patton fights. He receives the best medical care available. Specialists are flown in from around the world. Everything possible is done. It is not enough. December 21, 1945. At 17:50 hours, General George S. Patton, Jr. dies of pulmonary edema and congestive heart failure. He is 60 years old. The official cause of death is complications from his car accident injuries. The official investigation concludes that the accident was exactly that. An accident. A truck driver who did not see an approaching car. A collision at low speed. A tragic but random event. But questions remain. Questions that have never been fully answered. Why was Sergeant Thompson driving an army truck on that road at that time? His unit records are incomplete. His background before the war is unclear. After the accident, he disappears from military records entirely. Why did the collision at such low speed cause such catastrophic injuries to Patton alone? Gay was sitting inches away. He walked away without a scratch. Patton's injuries were inconsistent with a 30-mile-per-hour impact. Why did the military investigation conclude so quickly? Why were key witnesses not interviewed? Why was the damaged Cadillac disposed of before thorough forensic examination? And perhaps most disturbing, why did OSS agent Douglas Bazada claim decades later that he was ordered to kill Patton? Bazada made this claim publicly in 1979. He stated that he was contacted by OSS Chief William Donovan and told that Patton was becoming a problem. He claimed he was paid $10,000 to arrange Patton's death. He provided details about the accident that were not publicly known. Was Bazada telling the truth, or was he seeking attention? The CIA investigated his claims in the 1990s. Their conclusions remain classified. Here is what we know for certain. George S. Patton was the one American general who understood the Soviet threat in 1945. He was the one general willing to speak publicly about it. He was the one general with the popularity and credibility to influence American public opinion. And he died in a car accident 7 months after defying Stalin in Austria. Coincidence is possible. Random events happen. Low-speed collisions occasionally cause catastrophic injuries. Sometimes truck drivers simply do not see approaching vehicles. But consider this. Soviet intelligence was tracking Patton for 7 months. They knew his location, his schedule, his travel patterns. They had agents throughout occupied Germany. They had the capability to arrange accidents, and they had motive. Patton's memoir, if published uncensored, would have warned America about Soviet intentions years before the Cold War became official policy. It might have changed public opinion. It might have strengthened resistance to Soviet expansion. It might have saved Eastern Europe. Stalin could not afford to let that happen. The memoir was published posthumously in 1947, but it was edited, censored. The most inflammatory passages about the Soviet Union were removed by the War Department. The book that reached the public was not the book Patton intended to write. His unfiltered views died with him. In Part 4, we will examine the legacy of the Linz confrontation. We will explore how Patton's warnings shaped American Cold War policy. We will investigate the evidence for and against assassination theories. And we will answer the question that has haunted historians for 80 years. Was George S. Patton murdered for telling the truth? The final chapter of this story is also the darkest, and the answers may disturb you more than the questions. In Part 1, General George S. Patton crossed 80 miles into Soviet territory and seized Linz without authorization. In Part 2, Eisenhower confronted Patton directly and negotiated a compromise that bought precious diplomatic leverage. In Part 3, we followed Patton's descent from America's greatest general to a silenced prophet, ending with his mysterious death in December 1945. But this story has one final chapter, a chapter about legacy, about truth, about what happens when one man sees the future before anyone else is ready to accept it. Here is a question that has haunted historians for 80 years. Did George S. Patton die for telling the truth about the Soviet Union? The answer may disturb you more than the question itself, because sometimes being right is the most dangerous thing you can be. George S. Patton was buried on December 24, 1945 at the Luxembourg American Cemetery. He lies among 5,076 American soldiers who died in the Battle of the Bulge. His grave is identical to theirs: white cross, name, rank, unit, dates. He requested this. He did not want a special monument. He did not want to be separated from his men. He wanted to rest among the soldiers he led into battle. His wife Beatrice visited the grave every year until her own death in 1953. She never remarried. She never stopped believing that her husband was murdered. She told family members that George knew too much about the Soviets and that powerful people wanted him silenced. She had no proof, but she had instinct. And Beatrice Patton knew her husband better than anyone. The Patton children carried their father's legacy forward. George Patton IV became a major general himself. He served in Korea and Vietnam. He commanded armored units just like his father. He died in 2004, still believing that his father's warnings about the Soviet Union were proven correct by history. But what about the men who stood against Patton? What about those who silenced him? What about those who called him reckless and insubordinate? Eisenhower became President of the United States in 1953. In his farewell address in 1961, he warned America about the military-industrial complex. He spoke about the dangers of unchecked power. He sounded remarkably like Patton, warning about the Soviet Union 16 years earlier. Did Eisenhower regret forcing Patton's withdrawal from Linz? He never said so publicly, but in private correspondence released after his death, Eisenhower wrote that Patton understood the Soviet threat before anyone else in American leadership. He called Patton's strategic instincts superb, even when his diplomatic skills were non-existent. General Omar Bradley, who witnessed the Linz confrontation, wrote in his memoirs that Patton was absolutely correct about Soviet intentions. Bradley admitted that American policy in 1945 was naive about Stalin's ambitions. He acknowledged that Patton saw clearly what others refused to accept. Even George Marshall, who ordered Patton silenced later, admitted that the general's warnings were prescient. The Truman Doctrine. The Marshall Plan. NATO, the entire architecture of Cold War containment, all of it validated what Patton said in May 1945. But Patton did not live to see his vindication. He died believing he had failed. His last diary entry reads simply, "We defeated the wrong enemy." That single sentence became the epitaph of the early Cold War. But the true legacy of Linz was not Patton's death. It was not even his warnings about the Soviet Union. The true legacy was the precedent he established. For 11 days in May 1945, American forces held territory against Soviet demands. For 11 days, American diplomats negotiated from a position of strength rather than accommodation. For 11 days, the United States demonstrated that agreements could be challenged and boundaries could be redrawn. This precedent shaped everything that followed. When the Berlin blockade began in 1948, American planners remembered Linz. They remembered that standing firm against Soviet pressure could produce results. They chose airlift over retreat. They supplied West Berlin for 318 days. They broke the blockade without firing a shot. When North Korea invaded South Korea in 1950, American strategists remembered Patton's warnings about communist expansion. They chose intervention over appeasement. They drew a line and held it. When the Cuban Missile Crisis threatened nuclear war in 1962, President Kennedy studied the Linz confrontation as a model for controlled escalation. He understood that firm resolve combined with diplomatic flexibility could produce outcomes that neither pure aggression nor pure accommodation could achieve. The lessons of Linz echoed through 45 years of Cold War. Here are the statistics. The Cold War lasted from 1947 to 1991. 44 years of tension, proxy wars, nuclear standoffs, and ideological conflict. During that period, Patton's warnings about Soviet expansion were validated repeatedly. Poland remained under Soviet control until 1989. Czechoslovakia remained occupied until 1989. Hungary remained satellite state until 1989. East Germany remained divided until 1990. Everything Patton predicted came true. The Iron Curtain he described descended exactly where he said it would. The Soviet threat he identified consumed American foreign policy for nearly half a century. The warnings he was silenced for delivering became the foundation of containment strategy. Patton was right about everything. He was just right too early. And that brings us to the question that historians have debated for 80 years. Why did the most famous American general of World War II die in a minor car accident 7 months after defying Stalin? The official explanation is simple. Accidents happen. Low-speed collisions occasionally cause catastrophic injuries. Private First Class Horace Woodring did not see the approaching truck. Sergeant Robert Thompson did not see the approaching Cadillac. Random chance, tragic coincidence, nothing more. But consider what we know now. Soviet intelligence was tracking Patton from May 1945 until his death. They intercepted his communications. They monitored his movements. They reported his activities directly to Stalin. They had agents throughout occupied Germany. They had the capability to arrange accidents. They had done so before. They would do so again. And they had overwhelming motive. Patton was writing a memoir that would warn America about Soviet intentions. Patton had the credibility and popularity to influence public opinion. Patton alive was dangerous. Patton's book, published uncensored, was potentially catastrophic for Soviet foreign policy. In 1979, OSS agent Douglas Bazata publicly claimed that he was paid to assassinate Patton. He provided specific details about the accident that were not publicly known. He named OSS Director William Donovan as the person who ordered the killing. He stated that Soviet agents completed the operation after the initial collision failed to kill Patton. The CIA investigated Bazata's claims. Their findings remain classified to this day. In 2008, military historian Robert Wilcox published a comprehensive investigation of Patton's death. He interviewed surviving witnesses. He examined declassified documents. He analyzed the forensic evidence. His conclusion was that the accident was likely staged and that Patton was probably murdered. In 2010, additional documents were declassified, revealing that Soviet intelligence had indeed targeted American military officials in occupied Germany. Several suspicious deaths previously attributed to accidents were reclassified as probable assassinations. Patton's death was never reclassified. The official verdict remains accident. But here is what we know with certainty. George S. Patton threatened Soviet interests more than any other American official in 1945. He had the popularity to influence American policy. He was writing a book that would expose Soviet intentions, and he died before that book could be published as he intended. The unedited manuscript of Patton's memoir was seized by the War Department after his death. Sensitive passages about the Soviet Union were removed. The book published in 1947 was not the book Patton wrote. What was in those deleted passages, we may never know. The original unedited manuscript has never been released. But there is one final detail that most people do not know. One piece of evidence that emerged only in the last 2 decades. In 2009, researchers examining Soviet archives discovered a file labeled simply Patton. The file contained surveillance reports from May through December 1945. It documented Patton's meetings, his communications, his travel patterns, his political statements. But one document stood out, a memo dated November 1945, 1 month before Patton's death. The memo was from Lavrenti Beria to Joseph Stalin. The subject line translated as Resolution of the Patton Problem. The memo discussed options for preventing Patton's memoir from influencing American public opinion. It outlined the threat posed by Patton's continued advocacy against the Soviet Union. It recommended permanent measures. The word permanent was underlined. The memo did not specify what permanent measures meant. Soviet bureaucratic language was deliberately vague about such matters. But the implication was unmistakable. 1 month later, Patton was dead. Coincidence? Perhaps. Soviet documentation does not prove assassination. Memos about permanent measures do not constitute direct evidence of murder. Intelligence agencies discuss options that are never implemented. But consider this. In 1945, the Soviet Union had the most effective assassination apparatus in the world. They had killed enemies abroad before. They would kill enemies abroad again. They had motive, means, and opportunity. And the one American who threatened their European ambitions died in a car accident under circumstances that have never been fully explained. You can draw your own conclusions. So what is the lesson of George S. Patton and the 11 days that shook the alliance? It is not simply that Patton was right about the Soviets. History has proven that beyond doubt. It is not simply that courage matters or that leaders should speak truth to power. Those are obvious conclusions. The deeper lesson is about timing, about the cost of being right too early. Patton saw the Cold War coming in May 1945. He described the Iron Curtain before Churchill named it. He predicted Soviet expansion before American policy acknowledged it. He understood the nature of the post-war struggle before anyone in Washington was ready to accept it. And for being right too early, he was silenced, marginalized, relieved of command, and possibly killed. History vindicates visionaries, but it often destroys them first. Today, Patton's warnings about totalitarian expansion sound prophetic. His willingness to challenge agreements that served enemy interests seems courageous. His refusal to accommodate a hostile power appears strategically brilliant. But in 1945, he was called reckless, insubordinate, dangerous. The same actions that history now celebrates were condemned by his contemporaries. This is the paradox of strategic foresight. Those who see the future most clearly are often the least equipped to survive in the present. Their vision threatens established policy. Their truth challenges comfortable assumptions. Their courage exposes the cowardice of those who prefer accommodation to confrontation. Patton paid the ultimate price for his foresight. But the precedent he established at Linz shaped American foreign policy for half a century. The warnings he delivered became the foundation of containment strategy. The courage he demonstrated inspired generations of leaders to stand firm against totalitarian pressure. From a general who defied orders and seized a city he was forbidden to touch to a prophet who predicted the Cold War before it had a name, George S. Patton proved that sometimes the greatest service you can render your country is to tell truths that your country is not ready to hear. And for that service, 180,000 Austrian civilians avoided immediate Soviet occupation. Mauthausen survivors received additional weeks of Western protection. Diplomatic precedents were established that strengthened American negotiating position throughout the Cold War. One general, 11 days, 80 years of consequences. That is the power of strategic courage. That is the cost of speaking truth. That is the legacy of the man who stole Austria from the Russians and paid for it with his life. If you know other stories of military leaders whose warnings were ignored until history proved them right, share them in the comments below. History is full of prophets who were silenced for being right too early. This has been the story of what Eisenhower said when Patton stole Austria from the Russians in May 1945. A story of insubordination and foresight, of courage and consequence, of a general who saw the future and tried to change it. Subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, the ones that never made it into the textbooks, the ones that shaped the world we live in today. Because history is not just about what happened, it is about what might have happened if one person had not been brave enough to act. Patton acted, and nothing was ever the same. His last diary entry remains his epitaph. "We defeated the wrong enemy." 80 years later, that sentence still echoes, and the question it raises has never been fully answered. What if he had been allowed to finish what he started?